Uh-huh.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another Chris Bond 21 Reviews, and today we're looking at Banjo-Kazooie. Released in 1998 during the prime of the N64, Banjo-Kazooie was developed by Rare, a company that had already proven itself in past endeavors. Rare cut their teeth in the early days of the NES, having developed over 30 titles. The most prominent of these was probably Battletoads, which released at the end of the console's lifespan. They received far more recognition during the early 90s when they became a second-party developer for Nintendo, and were given access to one of Nintendo's IPs, Donkey Kong. Rare's Donkey Kong Country trilogy proved that Rare had the talent to not only craft excellent platformers, but high-quality ones at that, a talent that would serve them well as they began development on games for the N64. Banjo-Kazooie originally began life as the game only known today as Project Dream. Dream started development for the Super Nintendo, but as development went on, Rare moved the project to the N64. The original isometric perspective that the game would have had was changed after moving to the updated hardware. Rare then chose to make the game into an RPG with a pirate theme. I highly recommend researching more on Project Dream, as it has one hell of a development history, with ideas for the plot changing constantly, along with the game's genre. The long and short of it was that during one of these development cycles, the team had created designs for a bear named Banjo, who they had hoped to use as the main character, after their human protagonist was seen as not relevant. Then Super Mario 64 dropped, and Rare had such admiration for that game that they chose to restart development from scratch and change their game into a platformer. Now in hindsight, Rare seemed to have a weird streak in the 90s of taking genre of games that Nintendo made and making them a little better. It technically already had happened prior to Banjo-Kazooie's release in 1997. Nintendo dropped Mario Kart 64 in February of 1997, and then Rare answered back with Diddy Kong Racing by the end of that year. Mario Kart 64 was basically the Super Nintendo original, just in 3D. Well, the tracks were in 3D, the character models were 2D sprites, go figure. Meanwhile, Diddy Kong Racing had a story mode, an overworld to explore, 3 types of vehicles to race in, along with a progressively harder mission structure than what Mario Kart had. You can kind of see how Rare took the original concept of a kart racing game and injected it with so much more to do. We'll keep that in mind since Banjo-Kazooie is essentially Rare's version of Super Mario 64. I won't deny it, but I proudly hold the opinion that Banjo-Kazooie is the better game of the two. I know that might be a bold statement, but look, I mean no disrespect for Mario 64. Mario 64 is still one of my favorite games for the system. It was one of the first games most people, myself included, played on the N64. Hell, it was the first game that most people played in 3D to that extent. To that I say that Mario had its own place in my mind in the history of gaming, just not as my favorite platformer on the N64. And that really has to do with the fact that Rare put so much more into the structure of Mario 64 to give Banjo-Kazooie its own identity. So I know I've rambled on for a bit, but this setup is very important, as you'll soon see. So let's break down why I think Banjo-Kazooie is one of the greatest games of all time. Banjo-Kazooie tells the story of the evil witch Gruntilda, who is living in her lair in Spiral Mountain doing the usual things witches do, I guess, when she asks her cauldron who the most beautiful person in the world is. Just a side note here, but does Disney own the copyright for asking a magic mirror that question? I mean, that wouldn't really surprise me at this point in time, but just thought. Anyway, the cauldron tells her it's Tooty the bear, Banjo's sister. Unhappy with this not-so-shocking revelation, Grunty heads out into Spiral Mountain and kidnaps Tooty, and plans to suck the beauty out of her in order to make herself beautiful. Banjo and Kazooie, meanwhile, were asleep while this was happening, and now they have to head into Gruntilda's lair and rescue Tooty. Story-wise, that's about as far as the plot develops. It's simple to be sure, but hey, most platformers during this era usually only had a plot that could be summed up in a sentence or two. Most of the plot was pretty much detailed in the manual, which I don't have Banjo-Kazooie's original manual, but yet it went a little bit more into detail than what's here. These plots usually just revolved around the evil so-and-so, captured, stole, destroyed the main collectible object, and now you must journey to find them all. Banjo doesn't even actually get a scene with Grunty during the start of the game. Sure, as you progress through the lair, Grunty will throw some insults at Banjo, but you won't actually be seeing her face to face until the end. Though you can trigger an alternate ending of sorts should you get a game over. Yes, should you fail in your quest, it's not just the game over screen that pops up, but you're actually treated to a full cutscene showing Gruntilda succeeding in her plan to make Tooty look ugly. I always like the scene since it shows you just how bad you messed up and that you failed. Very few games have things like this, and honestly, it showed a lot of efforts on Rare part going the extra mile to even put this scene in the game. Instead, Banjo-Kazooie will meet a colorful cast of helpful characters and minor antagonists as they make their progress. Bottles of Mole will teach you new moves in each level, Mumbo Jumbo will transform the pair into various things to help you get around the world, Cheeto the Spellbook will reward you with cheats to help you in your quest, and you can even encounter Gruntilda's nice sister Brentilda, who will give you facts about Gruntilda's personal habits, which seems a bit weird and out of context, but trust me, they do serve a purpose. Trying to stop Banjo-Kazooie dead in their tracks is a long list of enemies that include a giant enemy crab named Snippers, a gorilla named Conga, a nasty crocodile named Mr. Vile, and that's just naming a few. Each character, be they good or evil, or complete with their own set of googly eyes, has their own personality and charm. But it's definitely the personality of both Banjo and Kazooie that helps them become incredibly likable to the player. Unlike Mario, who's silent and can't really react to the crazy characters or situations around him in his platforming games, Banjo and Kazooie don't suffer from silent main character syndrome. Banjo is humble and a tad naive, while Kazooie is loud and blunt, and will often go out of her way to insult just about anyone the pair comes across. And yeah, I said she, because believe it or not, Kazooie is a girl. It's something the game does explain in the opening, but yet young me just didn't seem to want to wrap my head around that for whatever reason. I just thought it was a boy. I don't know why. The different worlds are also very detailed and very refined, with each having a very strong sense of identity and easy to define landmarks. There's Mumbo's Mountain, a hillside opening tutorial world, Treasure Trove Cove, a fusion of a pirate themes and a beach, Clanker's Cavern, a damp, wet, and cold water level which has you entering a mechanical shark, Bubblegloop Swamp, which is littered with dangers such as piranhas in the water and killer frogs, Freeze Easy Peak, the snow level with lethal snowmen, Gobi's Valley, a hot desert with tombs to explore, Mad Monster's Mansion, a Halloween type of a level filled with gothic elements and style, Rusty Bucket Bay has you searching around a giant freighter ship, and finally Click Clock Woods has you progress through the world at different seasons in order to make progress. After you're making your way through all of the different worlds, the endgame presents itself. Rather than just having you go straight into the final fight with Gruntilda, you must first beat her in a quiz show. In probably one of the most creative endgame challenges I've ever seen, Grunty forces our heroes to move around on a board and answer questions based on their quest. And this is where the random bits of trivia from Gruntilda about Grunty come into play. Some of the spaces are just basic questions like asking you what character you met in which world, and sometimes you'll just have to guess from a location, or from a picture, or from a sample clip of music. There's also spaces where you can replay challenges you completed in the main game, now just under a time limit. After beating the quiz, you'll rescue Tooty, and then you get to properly fight Grunty in a big final showdown. And let me just say that this fight was the first real challenging boss fight I ever encountered in my life as a gamer. I was like 9 years old, and this fight was insanely challenging, though I'll go into a bit more detail on that and how that's changed over the years. Anyway, after knocking Grunty off her tower, she falls to the ground and gets buried under a huge boulder. Why she can't just use magic to blast it is beyond me, but hey, the day is saved, and Banjo and Kazooie's quest is at an end as they await their sequel. Which, apparently Rare had some pretty big cojones thinking that they had one already, because they pretty much stated clear as day that it's happening. So like I said, Banjo-Kazooie is a Mario 64 clone. In Mario 64, you went around Peach's castle, entering the worlds via painting and collecting power stars. The stars allowed you to make progress in the castle, opening up new levels and sections. And Banjo-Kazooie is essentially the same thing. You move around Grunty's lair, collecting jigsaw pieces, or jiggies, which you can use to complete pictures in the lair, which in turn open the worlds. There are 10 jiggies in each world, which can be hidden right out in the open or behind some sort of a platforming challenge of sorts. One of the jiggies in each world is rewarded for collecting all 5 Jinjos, which are little creatures that Grunty has captured and hidden in each of the worlds. The jiggies allow you to progress through the levels much like the power stars, but only to an extent. Like I said, the jiggies are used to complete pictures, and in turn open the levels, but the jiggies can't help you move to new areas of the lair itself. Along with the jiggies, there are 100 musical notes in each level. The more you collect in each world, the more your note score total is when you return to the lair. For instance, in the first 2 levels, there's obviously 200 notes to collect, and if you only collect 170 between both worlds, that's how many notes you'll be carrying when you arrive back in the lair. Preventing you from running all the way through the lair is the fact that the game throws note doors at you to block your progress. The goal is to collect as many, if not more, than the notes that the door requires. If you collect the full 100 in each world, you'll be just fine, though the challenge here really comes from not as your skill as a gamer, but rather the version of the game you're playing. You see, in the original N64 game, the notes that are collected are not collected permanently. What I mean by that is, say that you collected 99 notes in one world, which brings your total notes to 179, but the note door that you need to get past requires 180. You can't just go back in, find the last note you missed, or just collect one more note generally in the same world. Nope, you're going to have to collect all 99 again and then grab the 100th, and that will make the note total hit 180. And back when I was young, this was the bane of my time with this game. The first 2 levels are easy, but the third is mostly underwater, and if I had a nickel for all the damn times I drowned in that goddamn level. By the game's end, the last 2 levels are challenging, and it can be maddening to grab all the notes you need, though thankfully the remaster of the game that released in 2008 removed this feature. Instead, all the notes are collected permanently, so you can just scroll right in and grab whatever you missed. And now that brings us to the design of the levels themselves, which is just pure perfection, and honestly, it was something I hadn't really noticed in past playthroughs until now. A lot of that has to do with how the levels are laid out. They're not massive levels, so it's easy to stand in one spot and see everything laid out before you. And helping you with the exploration is the musical notes. They're laid out in such a way that will either lead you to challenges to collect a Jiggy or to one of Bottle's molehill to learn a new move. The notes act as a guide, as Banjo-Kazooie doesn't have a helpful star selection screen from Mario 64. Where that game gave you a small hint to basically figure out where to start your search for a star, Banjo-Kazooie has nothing. Although granted, I've heard quite a few people complain that the star map thing in Mario 64 wasn't very helpful since it's all written in like broken English, but you know, better than nothing. Now you'd think that that would seal this game's fate, and it would be an exercise in trial and error trying to figure out what you gotta do and where you gotta do it. but thanks to the layout of the notes and the molehills, you'll always be in the vicinity of a Jiggy or near a character that will give you one. And a good example of this is the layout of Bubblegroup Swamp, which has a central area that splits up into the 4 cardinal directions, so it's easy to start in one area and make your way around the level, and always remember how to get your way back to something. However, the design of one level is the irritation of many players and was sure the harshest part of the game for me even back when I was a kid, and hell, even now as an adult, and that level would be Rusty Bucket Bay. It's a semi-water level, but that's not really where the challenge stems from. No, instead, just swimming on the surface of the water drains your air here, and double air is taken from you should you dive beneath the surface. The other aspect is the platforming in the engine room. Not only are there 3 moving gears and spinning tubes, one of the hardest jiggies in the games is tied into this room. So first you gotta make your way slowly across to this switch, which is past the fans and the spinning tubes. Once you hit it, you have a very tight timer to traverse back through the hazards and back out to the top of the ship, and then dart to the back of the ship, jump into the death water, and very, very quickly grab the Jiggy behind the engines. Oh, and don't try to be a smartass and try to squeeze past those fans if you just miss the timer, because the minute they slowly start to spin again, the slightest touch is insta-death. Rusty Bucket Bay was without a doubt the hardest level to snag all 100 notes, let alone all the Jiggies. The remaster makes this level a tad easier as you can die in this mission and not have to really worry about the notes currently in your possession. Some people say Click Clack Woods is also hard, but I've never really had half the trouble with that level as I've had with Rusty Bucket Bay. But now having explained the Jiggies and notes are the bread and butter of progressing through the game, you might just be wondering what the final numbers are in order to reach that ending. In Mario 64, you only need 70 out of the 120 stars. That means that there are 50 challenges in that game that you can just write off as nothing and never touch. Banjo-Kazooie is a tad more demanding in this regard. There are 100 Jiggies present in the game and 900 notes total. In order to reach the quiz show, you only need 800 notes, and you never even need to have stepped foot in the final level. However, after the quiz, you are greeted by another note door that requires 10 more notes. So assuming you have the max 800 after 8 levels, it means you're going to have to go back to the last world and pick up 10 notes. And then you're greeted by Gruntilda's own picture, which requires a whopping 25 Jiggies. So doing all the math here, and getting all 9 levels unlocked, which is required as you need the notes to even reach this final picture, that's 69 Jiggies. Then add the 25 for the final fight, and you get a whopping 94 out of 100, leaving only 6 that you can leave behind. Yeah, this game's not really holding your hand and giving you a wide margin here. The game's like saying you want to reach that final battle, then you gotta dig deep and get good. Although honestly, I think the funniest part of this is when I found this picture as a kid, I wanted to cry because I had spent days getting to the quiz show, and once I'd beaten it and gotten past it and really was excited for the final fight with Gruntilda, I was so freaking upset that we had to go collect more Jiggies just to unlock this picture. The most surprising thing about all this is that even when I was a young kid, I never got turned off by any of this stuff. Not the notes being not permanently collected or the high end game numbers for completing it. If anything, it gave me the drive to try again and again and allow me to get better at the game. Helping you make it through all these challenges would be Bottles, or rather the moves he teaches you throughout the game. Banjo-Kazooie learn new moves in each level, allowing them to tackle all of the challenges that each world provides. Oh, and just to get out of the way, each level can be completed with all the moves that you get within a level. Aside from one Jiggy that's present in Gobi's Valley and Freezeezy Peak, there's no going 3 levels ahead and learning a move and then having to backtrack all the way to the first level to grab one Jiggy you missed in an earlier stage. Yeah, for the most part, each world can be completed 100% on your first trip, because that's keeping things simple and easy, and the designers wouldn't want to be cruel or deranged and pad out the game's length with levels that have sections gated by moves that you can only learn later in the game, causing you to aimlessly search around for hours trying to find the one thing you can take care of with the moves that you currently have, or forcing you to have the memory of a goddamn elephant as you try to remember hours or days later what world you moved past because you needed the one move from later in the game, and now you can't remember where it was because you moved ahead and there's more things that you can't do, and didn't I mention it's fun to enter a level and practically hear the game designers laughing and saying, good luck, because that would be an asinine decision, now wouldn't it? It would never be a good idea. I'm sorry. I got a little carried away there. Moving on. So yeah, the moves come in handy, and it's a blast to see what new abilities you're going to end up with. Bottles will teach you how to fly with Kazooie, and even shoot eggs out of her mouth and her butt for some reason. Seriously, there's no reason to ever use the eggs coming out the back door, but it's just too funny on its own not to mention. Some of my favorites are the Talon Trot, which makes Kazooie carry Banjo around and greatly increases your movement, the Spring Pads, which help you get a crazy amount of height, and definitely the Wonder Wing, which makes you indestructible. All the worlds save for the last 3 have Bottles teaching you something, which makes the last 3 worlds sort of the ultimate challenge, as you really have to use all the skills you have up to that point. Mumbo Jumbo, as I mentioned, uses his magic to help turn Banjo and Kazooie into different things to better traverse the worlds and help them snag a Jiggy or 2. The pair can turn into a termite, crocodile, walrus, pumpkin, and bee. Like I said, they're mostly used as a traversal method, or rather to explore part of the world that Banjo and Kazooie can't reach. The termite allows you to climb the termite tower in Mumbo's mountain, while the walrus can help you explore the freezing cold waters of Freezeezy Peak with no damage. More often than not, there's a Jiggy or a collectible that can be obtained by using one of these transformations. The transformations are enjoyable, and it's thrilling to see something in a level and be slightly confused on how to move past it, only to get the transformation and then realize how it all comes together. In terms of the bosses, they're actually really kind of, well, aside from Gruntilda, there really aren't any. But, whoa boy, did they sure make the Grunty fight as hard as nails. Gruntilda's fight is a multi-form battle that legit has you using most moves that you learn throughout the game. The first form has you trying to knock Gruntilda off her broom with the Rat-a-tat rap. Then she'll fly to each side of the arena and hover out to the side and toss fireballs at you. And the goal here is to fire eggs at her so she'll move to the next spot. The tricky bit here is that the fireballs can sometimes have the unintended action of causing knockback when they hit you, and once you fall off the side, it's back to the start. After that, Grunty takes back to the sky and now requires you to use the beak bomb to hit her, and this by far is the most anxiety-inducing part of the fight. You see, the beak bomb has Kazooie launching at Mach 10 to hit something. However, there's no lock on and there's no reticle to focus your shot onto, so you kinda gotta eyeball it, and trust me when I say that's easier said than done. Sure, every few moments Gruntilda will stop in place and give you some time to land the hit, but on the last go she gives you like milliseconds and you'll likely go flying off in different directions. Beak bombing into the edge of the tower also results in a game over, by the way. The final two phases are about the same, as you must pour eggs into Jinjo statues and then it's game over. Now, this fight can be all kinds of challenging if you go in with Banjo's base health, so hopefully you've been collecting the empty honeycomb pieces in each level, which if you can snag them all will net you 8 pieces of health total. However, even the 8 can drain fast if you take a ton of hit from the fireballs. Thankfully the game is not without mercy, as after each phase Grunty will drop 1 piece of health. But if you really want to assure victory, or at least put the odds a little bit more in your favor here, you can snag more notes and jiggies to open up a door after Grunty's picture, which will grant you double health. This fight took me months, like I said earlier, as a kid, and I would always get the feeling of a pit in my stomach whenever I would reach another phase. When I finally did triumph, I was immensely happy and didn't feel aggravated or cheated. Every time I died, I felt like it was on me. Except for maybe when I died during the beak bomb, that's just random and dumb luck. Presentation-wise, this is a gorgeous-looking game from all aspects. For the purpose of this video, I've been using footage from the Xbox 360 remaster, so widescreen is supported and the textures have been refined to be much more detailed. Though the base N64 game still looks great by comparison. Levels and characters are bright and colorful, and the remaster really helps those colors pop out. The music is also just as amazing. Composed by the legendary Grant Kirkhope, every track of Banjo-Kazooie is a memorable earworm that you're sure to be humming hours after you turned off the game. The foreboding theme of Gruntilda's lair, the Christmassy feeling evoked by the theme from Freezeezy Peak, the steam whistle score from traversing Rusty Bucket Bay, the game kicks off with showing you how awesome the score is by slowly blasting into the main theme before the title screen even pops up. Honestly, no matter how many times I've started up this game, I always let that intro play, since the main theme is infectious and really gets you in the mood to play. Kirkhope's score also received a nifty audio trick in having the music blend into all areas of the game. What this means is that as you progress through the game, the bass music will automatically change styles without needing to pause the track and start the loop up again. And this helps with immersing you in the environments. On the vocal sides of things, characters in the game don't talk, but rather speak in unintelligible babble. Each character has their own unique patterns of speech, and it adds to their personalities, though the highlight is the writing itself, which is sharp and filled with wit and humor that will make you want to hear out every character. The game also employs a strong library of bizarre and zany sound effects. Each time you pick up an ability or pick up an object, you'll be hearing some zany sound effect coming with it, and honestly, you could close your eyes at certain points and just pinpoint exactly which thing is happening on screen. Also, before I wrap this up, it would be a shame if I didn't mention the legendary Stop and Swap. So if you played the original game back in 1998, there were several areas in the game that were oddly inaccessible to access. While most of these locations were among the usual, I wonder if there's something behind that door, or is it just a door the designers put there syndrome that affected a ton of games in this era, there was actually more to it than that. There was one section of the game that no doubt confused a ton of players back in the day, and this was inside Wooz's cave in Freezeezy Peak. You see, there's this ledge over here with the orange Jinjo, and behind this window is a giant ice key that's just out of reach. And for years I spent wondering if there was a way to get in there, or if I had missed something in the level to gain access. I was just confused. And also confusing the situation more was that if the player had obtained all 100 Jiggies, the game showed off some of these areas being accessible, and giving player access to these eggs in some of the areas along with this ice key. Apparently the eggs and the key were meant to be used in the sequel Banjo-Tooie, which like I said earlier was hinted at by the end of this game. However, even after seeing the scenes of grabbing the eggs and the key, if the player tried to go back there and grab them, these areas were still inaccessible. So what was the deal? Well, like the ending claimed, the eggs and the key were to be used in Banjo-Tooie to unlock certain features. Rare had been relying on a little design flaw in the base model of the N64s. You see, the original N64s had this little tiny manufacturing flaw, I guess, where if you pulled a cartridge out, the player would have 10 seconds to swap another cartridge in order to keep that first game's data still in the system memory. However, by the time Rare had finished Banjo-Kazooie and were getting ready to implement this, they learned that new models of the N64 had been made and fixed this design flaw. And unfortunately, they fixed it by removing the 10-second window and turning it into a 1-second window, thus making it physically impossible to swap the cartridges unless you know Barry Allen. The cross-connected items that would basically have been unlocked in Banjo-Tooie were implemented in other ways in the long run. Much like Project Dream, the full story of Stop and Swap is another great read and legit went on for years before Rare finally spilled the beans on what the feature was and what it was intended to be used for. Overall, what can I say about Banjo-Kazooie? I think it's clear how great I think the game is. I know I made a ton of comparisons to Super Mario 64, but I don't use that comparison in an ill light. Without Mario 64, there would be no Banjo-Kazooie. But Rare did the one thing that so many companies in the 90s just flat out refused to do, which was to enhance the system and the formula that Mario 64 brought to the genre. Other companies created a gimmicky animal protagonist and filled levels to the teeth with collectibles because that's what Mario had done, or had slightly done, and this was them taking it to the next level on steroids. Banjo-Kazooie started there, but it made small changes that left a lasting impression and truly elevated the quality of the finished product. By adding more dialogue and a moveset and a rigorous challenge to the endgame, it involved on those core mechanics implemented by Mario 64. Banjo-Kazooie also had a lasting impression on other games that Rare developed in the later years of the N64. And this game allowed Rare to create the far more elaborate Donkey Kong 64, and they even spun the cutesy kitty platformer genre on its head with Conker's Bad Fur Day. Banjo-Kazooie is still one of my favorite games even after 22 years. God, I'm old. It's a game I love to pick up and play every couple of years. I spent the bulk of my childhood playing this game. I remember tons of summers dedicated to completing it, and while now I can finish the game in about 5 hours, it took years back in the day. But even though it had its tough moments and was a challenge, I never gave up or put the game down. The challenge was never unfair, and the game gives you the tools to accomplish your task. So even after snagging 98 notes in a level and then dying, sure I get frustrated, put the controller down, and probably bang my head into a wall for a few hours, but then I'd come back and be raring to give it another go and try again. So if you haven't played Banjo-Kazooie, I highly recommend you pick it up. The easiest way would be to probably pick up the Xbox 360 Arcade Remaster, because it can be found on either the Xbox Store or the Rare Replay Collection on the Xbox One. Yeah, Rare got bought by Microsoft during the turn of the millennium, and now they own the franchise, and thanks to some poor decisions, they let the Baron Bird fall into obscurity, but that's a story for another time in another long video. So check back when I get the chance to maybe review the sequel, Banjo-Tooie, which I'll have a lot more to say because, oh boy, do I have some controversial opinions on that particular endeavor. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next review.